Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Let's go again, discovering more of Madagascar, presented by NatHab's Guide Development Director and Expedition Leader, Annie Van Denther. And today she's joined by Expedition Leader Ant Bennett. Thank you both so much for being here today. Annie, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Kendall, and thank you to all of you for tuning in. We really appreciate you being here again with us to learn more about Madagascar. This is part of the Let's Go series. Being kind of stuck at home for the past year, I decided it was time to develop a series where we get to travel to the places that we are just really wanting to go to. And Madagascar is a place that I've never been to and that, boy, I would really love to get to. So a few weeks back, I asked Ant Bennett to take me to Madagascar, and we had so much fun traveling to that place that we realized we had a whole other additional webinar that we needed to do. So that's what we're going to do today. And Ant, I want to thank you for joining me again. So let's go again. Let's discover some more about Madagascar.
Thanks, Annie. Hi, everybody. Good to be here again, and good to be able to chat more about Madagascar. I can't wait to get back on the ground there as well. So you can see one of our cuties. These little guys are what it's all about. And our presentation today, we're going to chat a little bit about formation of Madagascar. How did these animals get there? And some of the challenges that they faced as well. And I thought to help folks kind of figure where we're talking about is up on the top right, you'll see the little map of Madagascar and the star in the map. That kind of indicates which part of Madagascar we're going to be in, if you see that on a slide. So yeah, I think we should kick off. What do you think?
That sounds fantastic. And to get going, I think, if you could let us know, Ant, how did Madagascar develop into the unique island that it is today?
Great way to start, Annie. I'm going to kick off with a little video that I was super lucky to discover a couple of weeks ago. And these scientists put together this video clip, and I'm just going to let it explain. It's going to stop at various points, and I'm going to use my cursor once off just to show folks where Madagascar is going to be on this map. And then you can keep your eye on that region of the map and see just how this island formed. You see Madagascar there? There we go. Madagascar in a nutshell, how it came to be. This is a video that I've been dying to actually be able to create, and somebody very clever in the scientific community created it. And it's just the easiest way of explaining how this island ended up where it is today. One of the big things here, Annie, is Madagascar is what we call a continental island. You saw it breaking away from Africa, and then you saw it splitting off from India. There's also Oceanic Islands, and this author that I'm busy reading at the moment, David Quammen, The Song of the Dodo, funny enough, puts it very, very succinctly. Oceanic Islands start off with no life and have everything to gain, just like this little island of Hawaii here that's currently forming. And continental islands like Madagascar, they form with pre-existing life, and they have everything to lose, because once you're an island, that's it. And I also want us to think of islands within an island, if that makes sense. We'll see as we go along. So here we have the potential for a new island to form. We talk of the East African Rift Valley, and if that were to actually split, you would have a new island forming off Africa. that landmass currently has all sorts of wildlife. It has human beings on it as well. So you can kind of imagine if you had to come back in 60 million years time, what would that island off the east coast of Africa now look like? It would be super interesting knowing what it is now. You come back 60 million years. Madagascar is the other way around. We actually have no idea how this really formed. There's a lot of theories. We have a couple of theories on lemurs and how they may have got there, and that's what we're going to look at today, and how Madagascar and its formation allowed the lemurs to develop into what they have.
And those lemurs, I mean, I gotta say, all of the formation of the island, I want to nerd out on it for hours when I get there, but it's the lemurs that I am so excited to go see. So tell us about these lemurs.
All right, we're going to look at a little bit of them now, and we're going to look at a lot more later as well. But basically, allowing yourself to be in isolation for 60 million years or more allows you to develop a whole bunch of different species. So we get to see these guys, the Indries, which are the largest living lemur currently, and even these little guys. These are mouse lemurs. There's mouse lemurs that are even smaller. There's one that like will fit into the palm of your hand. It's that small. It's the Madame Bertha's lemur. It's the smallest lemur known to science at the moment. Real cute guys. Here's the family. So folks want to know, where do lemurs fit in? And here we have it. We have the apes. We're part of the great apes. We have monkeys in one branch. We have the tarsiers in another branch. And then we have these lemurs, lorises, and galagos. And they're all one major branch, the lemuriforms of the family.
Okay, and so we've got these different families. Where are these family members found once we get to Madagascar?
Okay, so the interesting thing about that family group is that they're actually uniquely dispersed. And this is a great way of looking at it. The galagos, if people have been to Africa, they might know the galagos as the bush babies. Those are found here in the green. You have the lorises here in Southeast Asia. I have yet to see one of those. I'd love to see one of those guys. You have them here in Central Africa. I've not seen any of those either. And then the lemurs, only found in Madagascar. And if you look at the numbers, what's really interesting is the number of species. By far, the lemurs have way more species than these other groups. And that boils down to isolation. If you don't have major predators and human beings haven't been around for a long time on your patch of the woods, it gives you the opportunity to break off into different groups and find different niches that you can then survive in. And so you've got 100+ lemurs, and they're finding more all the time through genetics nowadays. It keeps us on our toes as guides. It's crazy. If you look at the other species, it's like 5 and 10. It's a really small number just because of competition. They have so much competition from predators and from humans as well.
That's why you said to this date regarding the smallest, because it's what we're finding to this date. So that is very, very interesting. And I know that the lemurs are so fascinating. I cannot wait to see one when I actually get to go to Madagascar. But there's something else you mentioned when we talked last time about Madagascar, and I've even learned how to say the name properly, the Baobab Tree. God,
You got it.
This is so beautiful. I mean, they're right out of a magical storybook. Tell us about the Baobab Tree.
Okay, so they are magical. They're a really crazy tree, and I use that in inverted commas because it doesn't have a heartwood. A baobab is actually pithy, fibrous. When a baobab dies, it disintegrates. It disappears, and all you're left with is a shallow depression in the ground. You would never know that there was a baobab tree there in the first place. And we get to see, fortunately, 2 of these species. This is one in the southwest of Madagascar, and the picture doesn't really do it justice. I try to do a vertical pano here, and yeah, it kind of shows the size of this beauty, but really you got to see it up close and in person. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we've worked out that it takes 4 or 5 of us with our arms outstretched to circumvent this particular baobab. They're big. And then look where we are, on the coast, up in the northwest. This is the Mozambican Channel. This is the ocean, and there's baobabs growing on these little islets right down on the coast. It's nuts.
Okay, so I've got 2 things here. First of all, I think what you just said is you've got a group of tree huggers needed for a baobab tree.
Oh yeah.
And then secondly, there's something about this shoreline, minus the baobab, I get it, but there's something about the shoreline that reminds me of the Galapagos. As a naturalist, do you see some connections between Madagascar and the Galapagos?
Absolutely, absolutely. Some folks may have been to the Galapagos and they may have heard of something called the Rafting Theory. And just like we see in the Galapagos, I'm just going to put my cursor over there. So there it is over there. It has an ocean current that pushes life from South American west coast into the Galapagos. Likewise, there is a theory that lemurs and other life that is endemic to Madagascar, that we're not 100% sure of when it came there, because, for example, Madagascar formed 80 odd million years ago. There's a big gap in the fossil record. The sort of the earliest known fossil is about 60 million years for a primate. So there's a 20, 30 plus million year gap of what was actually going on. But rafting is thought to have been a way that maybe lemurs or the parents of the lemur got onto Madagascar mainland, and then baobabs as well. Super interesting that you've got all these different species, and that the species found in Australia is now considered to be from the African species, and quite possibly from one of the species in Madagascar. And through rafting, because if you look at the seed pod, you can see it's like a gourd, really thick skin. So imagine that falling into the ocean and just bobbing along for who knows how long, and then ending up in Australia, and slowly over time developing into its own species because it is in isolation. So we get to see 7 potential species of baobab if we travel around different parts of Madagascar, and on our particular itinerary we can see 2, sometimes 3, depending on where we end up. 3 species, of 2 of which are endemic to Madagascar.
So the biodiversity seems like it is just absolutely incredible when we talk about Madagascar. We've talked about the way that this amazing place was formed. We've talked about where the lemurs and all these different species and how their kind of family was formed, and now the way that the different species maybe came to the islands. There must be challenges to the biodiversity today, and we're looking at one of them here. Can you tell us a little bit about what is happening there today relative to biodiversity?
Sure. So I talked a little bit about islands within islands, and this is one of the big challenges. Is 3,000 plus years ago, humans arrived on the island, and they would need to start developing the island in order to survive. Think of farming, think of construction of your dwelling, you're clearing land. Because of the relationship with the Indonesian culture, rice is a really, really big part of the life in Madagascar. You can see the fields here. We don't know what was there previously. This has been going on for hundreds, thousands of years now, but There was some indigenous vegetation there, most likely. That had to be cleared. Rice paddies were created. You can see the gentleman over there, he's busy moving his cows by hand. I've yet to see a mechanical hand tractor churning up a field in Madagascar. It is all still very manual. So it's intensive labor. Rice is supporting them because it's a cash crop, but it's also the food that you eat a lot of in Madagascar. And in a way, it's created other habitats. So you can see the egrets in there. The egrets are busy going after insects that are found in the ponds, maybe frogs as well that would inhabit those ponds when they're wet. And we talked about land clearing. Here you go. Mostly a clay soil in this part of Madagascar. This is on our way down to the eastern highlands. Eastern rainforest. And every little bit of land is terraced. If you had to arrive here blindfolded, mute, ears muffed, and I took everything away, you could think that you were in Southeast Asia somewhere in some of these places, just because of all the terracing and the crops that are grown in these areas. And one of the challenges for these folks is you can see the power line running across here. That's power from a hydroelectric scheme going to the capital, Tana. These villages here, they don't have power. There's not a single electrical cable going into those places. They are still very, very rural. You can see the outhouse over here, pit toilet. They rely on charcoal for producing their food. Charcoal's got to come from somewhere. So you're cutting down vegetation to create charcoal that has a whole issue with lung health. One of the interesting things is that eucalyptus was planted, and so eucalyptus is now being used to produce charcoal, which is a positive in terms of you're not using indigenous hardwoods and you're not cutting forests. It's a negative in terms of eucalyptus is an invasive species as well, and it sucks up a lot of water out of the ground. So there's pros and cons to this, but ultimately people have got to live. They're trying to survive.
So we got a great question at the end of our last webinar about deforestation and the current kind of state of deforestation in Madagascar today. Tell us a little bit about that. We didn't really have enough time to answer that thoroughly. So tell us what's going on with deforestation in Madagascar today. Sure.
So you can see just from the previous slide, you had houses that were clay in structure, bricks, clay bricks. There would be wood involved in that. We're now down in the region of Andasibe, which is an area we go to look into reserves. This house is all wood, local wood, that's either indigenous or from exotic plantations. These folks are living on the margins of the forest. They are using the materials that are at hand because there's no Home Depot. You don't go to a Home Depot to get building material in these places. You use what is available. And coming to your question of deforestation, so this is a map. You can see 1957 there. The area of Andasibe, we go to this reserve down here to try and find the Indries. This is a secondary forest reserve. The Malagasy name is Analamazaltra. And then we come up to here into this reserve, and this is the Mantadia National Park. And that's more of a primary rainforest. So 1957, I'm going to swing backwards and forwards. Have a look on this margin over here. You see the change in land use. So this margin here, which was secondary forest, has now been taken over, and this is 37 years later. That's 1994, by human beings for agriculture, for dwellings, whatever the case may be. You can see, unfortunately, some inroads into some of these parks as well. So here we have two islands within the island of Madagascar, and the real challenge is trying to keep corridors open so that what is here can survive by being able to move hopefully backwards and forwards. That allows for genetic diversity, because we all know when you have two animals and that's the only two animals, they can breed, but who are they going to interbreed with? Themselves. And so you get a paucity of genetic material. Where are we? Very emotive issue.
So tell us what's going on here.
So this is an area down in the southwest. We drive through this town of Ilakaka to get to one of the reserves, and gemstones, specifically sapphires, were found in this region, in these ancient riverbeds, and this formed basically a mining rush, like the gold rush in the US. This is a gemstone rush, and these are artisanal farmers. Again, lots of people trying to survive. It's dry, you can't farm there very easily, and if you have an opportunity to make a little bit of money to keep yourself alive, to maybe keep your family alive, this is what has happened. It's brought in a lot of people from all over Madagascar hoping to get rich and strike it lucky. And that has challenges for the wildlife, which is found in the region, and it has challenges for the humans and the potential for, unfortunately, contact and conflict.
So I understand this is an area that we drive through, but I also know that the beauty of conservation tourism is that when we bring groups to these areas, we bring value to the area.
Absolutely.
And you know, it's interesting that exact topic, you and I got chatting about it as we were preparing, because my daughter had, you know, she's right at that age where she's sort of starting to open her mind up to world issues, and she had watched a movie on mining in a different country, but relative to makeup and the mine, and that can be the glitter that they want to get, right? And it brought up all kinds of discussions about what's worth it, what we use that we don't need, and all these kinds of things, and whether or not the company should pull out of the area. And it really did bring us back around to tourism and the idea that working in these places ethically and providing income that is for good and helps bring value to the area and jobs is really so often the answer. I mean, when NatHab started, we had seal hunters as our guides for our flagship trip, right? And the idea was these guys would stop hunting seals so they could bring us out on the ice and help us find these baby seals. In turn, they stopped hunting the seals and had this alternative income. And then we were able to also go find baby seals and bring value to watching the seals instead of to hurting them. And in so many places where we work, we've seen this over and over and over again. Bring value to the national park and keeping it intact so that people can come and see lemurs, right? And people can come
Absolutely.
and see the incredible biodiversity, and then hopefully provide income to people so that they can find alternative means of surviving rather than having to cut down those forests. So tell us more about the value of coming to this area and these incredible animals that we're going to see when we go there. I'm going to get there someday, Aunt. I am going to get there.
Absolutely. You're going to have a blast. You're 100% right, Annie. Conservation tourism or conservation travel, to my belief, is so important to protect these little islands that we are now visiting in the island of Madagascar. And you take this little cutie here, the gray bamboo lemur. It feeds on bamboo. Okay, here he's feeding on grass. He's saying no, not always. But eastern rainforests, they feed on bamboo. They are common but not common, if I can put it that way. Dependent on the stands of bamboo, people are dependent on stands of bamboo as well. So conservation travel, by protecting those areas, is protecting vegetation, and so we get to protect these little guys as well. The Indri. Yes.
I have to ask you a question about that last little guy real quick. Is he one of those guys that looks really cute but is actually kind of mean?
No, these
Okay,
guys are all cute. These guys are all
okay.
cute. These are some of the cutest animals you are ever going to see on the planet. I mean,
Okay.
what's not to love about a little teddy bear riding piggyback on mom's back? So the Indri. One of the things with the interesting thing with the Indri is you don't see a tail on an Indri. It's got a tiny little stump of a tail. No idea why. It doesn't hinder them moving through the forest, that's for sure, but they have developed to not have a tail, whereas other lemurs have developed a tail. Another cute little guy, this is a common brown lemur. They'll often wrap their tails over them like a scarf almost to keep warm. You can see the fingers there. I find it fascinating looking at the hands of these lemurs, and you just compare that to human beings and the opposable thumb, and you're like, wow, that could have been us. And spot the lemur.
They are well camouflaged, my friend. I think I can see where it is, but boy, I could be wrong.
There's the tail. There's the tail hanging down, and there's the lemur there. So this is an area called Rana Mofana. It's one of the few tracts of primary rainforest that we can get into. And as you can see, it's pretty adventurous. And we try and find the Milne Edwards sifaka in this tract that we go into. And here we got super lucky after trekking around quite a bit and stomping through the vegetation. Yeah, this is what I love about Madagascar. You go out there, you do not know what you're going to see. There's no group of vehicles like on an African safari with radios and guides talking to each other. This is us on the ground, and off we go. And we see what we can see.
That's adventure.
That's adventure. And now contrast this again and just have a look here. You've got, this is the eastern rainforest, very lush. It's very moist because of the geography of Madagascar. And then you go over the spine, as I call it, of Madagascar, and you're coming down into the southwest. You could think you're in Arizona or New Mexico or the outback of Australia. There we got your baobabs again. And this comes back to that slide earlier on with the artisanal mining, is that part of this region here, you can see the area, it's actually being cleared for firewood, most likely for construction materials for the mine prop or for the windlass to go down, and just for people's houses as well. So there's pressure on the environment, and this is again why it's so important, because we travel through this area to get to this tiny reserve and look for lemurs. This place is stunning.
Gorgeous.
It's called Relais de Lorraine. It's in the Asa National Park region. What is super interesting about this place is they have this stream that runs through, and that has allowed the water that is visible, has allowed the vegetation to develop. And it's this symbiotic relationship. If the vegetation develops, it provides shade and cover. It prevents the water from disappearing into the ground and being sucked out of the ground as well. And we're looking sort of towards the north and west. So the Asa National Park is this Jurassic sandstone area up here. And you're thinking, oh, Jurassic sandstone, what are we going to see? There are lemurs in here. They're very, very rare lemurs because the vegetation is so rare. It's a very rocky terrain, very dry terrain. And so this, again, without this hotel complex here, this would have gone, and who knows what life may or may not have been here in the end. There we have some travelers. This is a group that I was leading. This gentleman over here on the left is Rija, R-I-J-A, a great local guide that I work with, and he's got a good sense of humor. We're always having a great time on the trips. Walking in Asa National Park, seeing some of the landscape and also going to look and see what wildlife we can find there. It's good to see that they were actually smiling in this picture. It was a hell of a time to get these people to smile. We talked about lemurs in dry areas. That little reserve called Zumbitz that we go down to in the southwest, it's the furthest southwest that we get on the itinerary. There's a lemur there called the Zumbitz sportive lemur. It's a nocturnal lemur, and in terms of lemurs, there's 5 families. Think of it as 5 groups. 3 of those groups are completely nocturnal. We saw the little mouth lemur picture in the beginning. You got to go walking at night to find these guys. The challenge with Zumbitz is we can't get there at night. Some of the reserves now, they have prevented us from walking at night because of the pet trade. Unfortunately, human beings, being human beings, were collecting animals at night to then try and sell on outside of Madagascar. So it got shut down. But in areas that we can do walking on peripheries, we do so. So these guys, because of the cavities in the trees, the local guides kind of know the territories, and we literally will go almost from one cavity to another, trying to see if we can find one of these sportive lemurs. And we got super lucky with this guy that was actually still out when we came along. Sometimes all we see is an eyeball staring out at us from the crack in the vegetation. So again, the challenge here, the conservation travel, by protecting this little grove of vegetation, big trees with cavities are allowing this lemur to survive. You cut those down for firewood or building material, they're going to die. They're going to be gone.
And do we visit any specific conservation projects when we travel in Madagascar?
That's a good question. Absolutely. So we're visiting national parks predominantly, but there are 2 places that we visit that are really special in terms of, the one is a community reserve. So it's an area of vegetation that is not indigenous vegetation, but the lemurs that are found there have managed to figure out a way of surviving, and the community, through the government assistance, created this community reserve. And so we get to go and see these lemurs and other wildlife that is in the area. And so the lemurs are benefiting and the community is benefiting, and that's what it's about. They need to live side by side. So I'm going to play this little video clip. Look at the video clip and tell me what you see.
That one had 2.
Exactly, you got it. Twins. First time I've ever seen twins in lemurs. It's possible. And you know,
So cool.
as a guide, you read things in books, and when you actually physically see it, I just get super excited. And that was completely unplanned. I just got lucky that the group that was coming down the track was actually sort of pushing these lemurs, and we were coming up the track. So our whole group, I just said, stop, sit down, pull out your phones, get your videos, doing whatever. And we just sat there and we just videoed it and had these lemurs coming. I mean, literally, they were 1-2 feet away from us, just super habituated and relaxed to us because we behave. They're happy to walk past us with their babies on, and then twins. I mean, wow.
Wow. Can you play it one more time?
Yeah, let me see if I can do that. Yep, there we go. There we go. I love the way they walk with the tails up. And if you're not sure, these are ring-tailed lemurs.
And here come the twins.
There come the twins. Lots of babies.
There they are. Look at that.
Jockey style, just riding jockey. So that's kind of interesting to me because it reminds me a little bit of baboons. So baby baboon will initially cling on the chest of the mother, and the mother will hold it when she's moving around. She kind of moves on 3 limbs in a way. And then when the baby's a bit stronger, bigger, she might be moving on 4 limbs, and the baby's holding on still underneath. And then the baby switches to what we call jockey style. And mom will be walking along on four legs, and baby is sitting on her back, sort of upright, like, come on, mom, let's go. I want to go and get that fruit or whatever. So it's interesting seeing the similarities between an African monkey and a lemur in Madagascar in that respect.
It's not too different with humans.
I'll take your word for it. I don't have kids. So the other place that we visit is a very, very special and interesting place. It's called Untitled, and it's up on the northwest coast. It used to be a coconut plantation of all things, and then the family that owned it tried to develop it into a seaside resort, and that kind of sort of worked but wasn't working. And then somebody had the really brilliant idea of working with the local community. It's the Sakalava people up in that part of the world. Many of the community are employed by the hotel, and they had this idea of like, let's preserve the vegetation that is inland from this resort. It's dry deciduous forest. And so it became just a self-preservation project. And there were lemurs in there. And slowly these lemurs have become habituated, and they have bred. And then they actually got recognized by the government. I think this was 2018, if I'm not mistaken, that the government officially recognized them as a kind of a private reserve. So it helps them to really take hold of that area and make sure that it is not cut down for whatever purposes. So you've got lemurs in here. You have a lemur called an ii, which is a highly nocturnal lemur. It's one of the 5 families. They started to try and reintroduce them into this area. There's an animal called a fossa. We saw pictures of it in our first installment, which is the carnivore that predates on lemurs and other wildlife. They actually managed to release a fossa. It was caught in a village, because unfortunately fossa will sometimes go for chickens. And instead of killing it, the villagers let the hotel know, and they were like, okay, we're going to come and rescue this animal. And they released it into the reserve. And then tortoises, the Aldabra tortoise as well, is another project of theirs that they are looking to help. And I mean, where have you ever come across a lemur hanging out on a beach? Look at this guy. He's like, okay, am I going to go swim? Am I just going to go for a walk on the beach? What am I going to do? And occasionally they will come to breakfast or lunch while you're there. Yeah, this one came bouncing through and was checking us out. Wasn't really interested in the menu. They're not fed there. That's very important. There's no supplemental feeding there. These are wild lemurs that have become habituated to us being there, and because we behave in the way that the hotel wants us to behave, they will leap onto these posts. They never come onto the tables, and then they move off. And it's some of the best lemur viewing that you can have. It's just simply awesome. I can't wait to get back into Madagascar and check it out. It's, yeah. All I can say is, can this pandemic please be over so we can get back to traveling?
Let's go. Let's go.
Let's go. Let's go. Absolutely.
Oh, well, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing the information with us. And I think, Kendall, we're ready for questions if anybody has questions.
Great. Yeah, we've got a lot of good questions for you. And I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question for Ant or Annie today, you can submit those in your control panel under the questions field. Okay, first question. One of the first ones that came in, what criteria justifies a new species?
That's a very good question. it boils now down to genetics and scientists studying DNA and confirming that the genetic markers are specifically different from an existing species, that they can then classify it as a new species. In the past, it came down to isolation, and it came down to physical characteristics. So you would look at an animal and say, well, this looks like that, but it's living in its own area, so I think we can probably call it a different species. And that would form a large argument in the scientific community. And genetics has really started to open up. And it's not just with lemurs, it's with everything, it's plants, birds, you name it. Genetics has exploded onto the scene and opened up some really, really interesting questions. It's answering, well, I would say it's creating more questions than answers.
There is a bit of a process though that science goes through, right? And that the old school way, of course, was there's biologically isolated. In other words, can you reproduce? So
Yes.
that's the first and foremost way of understanding, are these animals two different species? Then you would say, are they geographically isolated? Are they ever going to come in contact with each other? So you might have two animals that could reproduce if they were going to come in contact with each other, but they're not going to. So they're not going to reproduce. So then we would say, okay, how long have they been genetically isolated because they're geographically isolated? And then we start to wonder about them being different species. Then we say, are they reproductively isolated, right? Is there something that goes back to that first one? Then are they behaviorally isolated? So in other words, does this animal live in the canopy and this animal lives, near the forest floor? Or does this animal behave in this way and that animal in this way? And this is the sort of process that you would go through when you're starting to look at different species before the genetics gets to the process. This is how in the Galapagos, they started to sort out the finches and the tortoises. You have tortoises who are close to each other in species, but they've been geographically isolated for so long that they literally develop a different shaped shell and cannot reproduce. Like they don't fit together, right?
Yeah.
So all of those four things, behaviorally, biologically, geographically, behaviorally, and then genetically, those all become defining in a way that eventually you get really clearly, this is a different species. So there's a process to it.
There's a huge process. And previously in Madagascar, I think it was, they thought it was maybe 50 species of lemur. But as they've started to use DNA, they are finding, oh wait, these two mouse lemurs that look really similar aren't. They inside the internal workings, it's not the same. Even though to our eye, you and me, you can look through binoculars all you like, you're like, but that thing is the same thing. And yet suddenly they are different. And like you say, yes, they are geographically separated. And so we're starting to realize, well, whoa, that little island of vegetation, and it could be tiny, it could be an acre of vegetation, is housing that species. If that acre of vegetation goes away, that species is gone. It's not like, okay, well, it's over there in another island of vegetation. And that's one of the key challenges for Madagascar, is all these little islands of vegetation. What are they housing? Because some of them we can't get to. It's really remote or just so far off the beaten track. We'd need 3 months in Madagascar to go and travel around as opposed to 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's critical. It's so interesting. Okay, earlier, but I wanted to make sure we get this in before this person logs off. You mentioned a book about the dodo. Could you repeat what the name of the book is?
Sure, absolutely. It's called Song of the Dodo, or The Song of the Dodo. And the author is a chap by the name of David Quammen, Quammann, I believe.
Great, perfect. So someone is wondering if there are opportunities for alternative power there, like solar or wind.
Yeah, that is something that I have asked myself, and one of the challenges, it seems, is infrastructure development, because there are areas in southwestern Madagascar which should be able to have wind farms, should be able to have large solar farms, but then you need transmission lines. You need to get that out to the different towns and villages. For example, we go to one town on the way to Isalo. They use a generator. They have a big diesel generator, and that's how the places that have power are getting power. It's not ideal, but right now for them, that is the best way of getting what little electricity they can get. So they probably could have, but they need the support of international companies to put in this sustainable or green energy. I think it definitely has a future in Madagascar in order to try and help Madagascar develop.
Okay. And another request we've had from a few people, actually, they want to know where the video map of the creation of Madagascar, where you got that. They want to find it themselves.
Okay, it's a New York Times article, and if you search on the New York Times, type in the word tectonic, and it should come up. It was in mid to late February that map was in the New York Times article. It's a fascinating article. I managed to download that map, and I obviously played with it a bit to be able to use it in this presentation, but it's actually much longer. That's 250 million years that we looked at. The entire map, I think, is 1 billion years.
Wow. Okay, great. Thank you. Someone was curious if you were aware of what ways WWF is involved in Madagascar.
Yeah, so WWF has a local chapter on the ground. It's WWF Madagascar. They do a lot of environmental education with local communities and trying to get people to work out ways in their village specifically, as opposed to just generally across the country, because it is a village by village process of how they can better live and what works for them. So one of the things that I came across was mangroves, and WWF was heavily involved with assisting local communities on the west coast of Madagascar, where the mangroves are found, in replanting mangroves, because obviously it stabilizes the soil and it acts as a nursery for stock, because these folks are fishing communities. They go out there trying to catch fish, and they were noticing they're getting less and less and less fishing stocks. And one of that is related to mangroves and having these nurturing communities. Siltation, because you've got rivers bleeding into Madagascar. And the other thing was assisting these fishermen with honey production and saying, okay, if we start apiculture, you can produce honey, which you potentially can sell on, but also it's a food source to yourself as well. If you're finding that you're not catching fish, you need a backup. And honey production was one of the other things that they were working with. I know they're very, very involved in sort of what we call the northern Mozambican Channel, which is the area between Madagascar and Mozambique, the country in Africa. And it's looking at ways of trying to preserve the biodiversity in the ocean, because that's the next big challenge. The areas in Madagascar that are there right now are there. They're not going to get any bigger. If anything, they're going to unfortunately get smaller because of pressure from human beings. So it's the local community environmental education, and then focusing on the oceans and trying to get that protected so that it supports those coastal communities, because without fish, those coastal communities are in dire straits.
Okay, so we're going to move on to more wildlife and plant questions. Do people use the baobab trees as well? And how old do the trees get?
Ancient. They can be 2,000 years old, 3,000 years old, maybe older. One of the challenges with trying to figure out how old a baobab tree is because it doesn't have rings, like a tree that we know. You cut a tree down, you can count the rings. Baobabs can shrink and swell because they store water. And so it's estimated from carbon dating that they could possibly be up to 3,000 years old in some places, and I'm quoting from African sources. In terms of use, the fruit is heavily utilized. You saw the gourd and that sort of powdery substance in there. It's really tasty. I really enjoy eating baobab fruit, and it's a high source of vitamin C as well. There's no real use in terms of the wood, in terms of firewood or anything like that.
All right. And are there any interesting wildflowers to see there?
In the summer season, so we're talking September onwards. September is spring in the southern hemisphere, going into October, November. That's when some of the wildflowers do start to come out. In the tropical rainforests, because it's a rainforest, it means there's a lot of moisture and you get orchids. There's something like 1,000 different species of orchid in Madagascar. And we actually visit an area called the Orchid Garden, where you can walk around and see some of these orchids, but in the forests as well. So eastern rainforests, you can get to see wildflowers almost any time of the year, and then in the western parts and the drier parts, it's more in the spring, summer months, but there are wildflowers.
Mm-hmm. And what about birds? For the birders watching, what can they expect?
Oh man, if you're a birder, you're in heaven. The endemics, I'm a naturalist. I love everything from reptiles to bugs to lemurs, but I do have a passion for bird watching, and you can see a lot of different species, some massive endemic species, and forest birding is tough. If you've ever birded on a forest, you can have a crick in your neck by the end of the day. That's for sure. A lot of the birds we identify by calls, but it's fantastic for birding.
Is there a best time of year for birding there?
Again, I would say the summer months are the better months, just because that's normally the breeding season for a lot of these birds. But to be honest, I've never really been disappointed when I've gone, and I mean that's from June through to November of a year. There's always birds around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're looking for wildlife, birds and insects are pretty much the two things, and plants, that you're likely to find.
Great. And the last question I'll end on today is someone is wondering when the best time of year is to see baby lemurs.
Very, very good questions. So the Indries that we saw, the big cute teddy bear, like, their babies are definitely May to June. That's when they're born, around about then. I'm just trying to think of the common brown lemurs. I think is a little bit later than that, and if I'm not mistaken, the ringtails are September, August, September. So again, I would say probably the latter months, like the August, September, October, November. Those are the months where you're more likely to see babies. and it depends which babies you're wanting to see. You know, it's certainly the latter half, let's say September, October, you would see more babies of different species of lemur than you would in the June, July months.
All right, great. Well, we've had some people wondering about different species you can find, and I just want to gently nudge people to watch your part 1, because you talked about so many other species in your part 1, and you can find that replay on our website. If you go to nathab.com/webinars and you click on the Watch Past Daily Dose of Nature webinars, you can find it under the Africa webinars section. So definitely check that out if you want to hear more about all the different species you can find on this amazing island. All right, thank you so much, you two. I'm going to turn it back over to you for closing comments, and we'll start with Ant.
Thanks, Kendall, and thanks to everybody that's been out there and watching us and tuning into these. It's really been great to relive all these memories, putting these presentations together, and I can't wait to get back out and traveling and see all these wild places and travel with you guys as well. I really look forward to it, and thanks to Annie as well, because it's been super fun working on these projects with her.
All right, and thank you, Ant, for teaching me about Madagascar. I cannot wait to go. I'm like at the edge of my seat for every single one of these, learning about these places. And all of you, thank you so much for tuning in. We are just thrilled to have our jobs be that we get to learn about these places and share them with all of you. We cannot wait to get back out into this wonderful world, and it's happening. It is starting to happen. There are trips happening as we speak. And so if you want to go to Madagascar, call your adventure specialist and let's get going. Kendall, thank you for all the work that you do to make these happen. And I'm sure there's a webinar tomorrow, and I will see all of you next week, Thursday. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again, you two. Thank you. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in. Do be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We've got a fun one tomorrow. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have a replay available on our website soon. And I will conclude the webinar now. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you.